Welcome back to Stormi Tells Ghost Stories Haunted Wilmington on my Girls Rock Productions channel. Remember to like and subscribe to my channel for more of my content. For thousands of years, Wilmington, North Carolina belonged to Native Americans. Historians don't know the exact name of the tribe, but they do know that they were part of the East North Carolinian Siouan tribes, and today they are simply known as the Cape Fear Indians. The natives' first encounter with European explorers would have come back in 1662 when William Hilton would have landed here on the adventure. The natives would have brought food and women as an attempt at peace, but as we know, the Europeans, they were not looking for peace. They wanted land and resources. So, by 1808, all the Cape Fear Indians would be gone. Some would die from battles or disease, and others would be enslaved or would flee to modern-day South Carolina. The Europeans would get their land and resources, but they would also inherit a very deadly and mysterious river. The Cape Fear would go on to sink over 100 vessels within the next 300 years, including 21 Civil War ships, and there are a couple of theories as to what may have sunk these ships. First is that it was a giant, 40-foot long, 4-foot wide, snake-like creature that has been seen quite a few times throughout history in the river. The first time it was spotted was back by a European explorer named Giovanni de Verrazzano back in 1524. It was next seen by the Earl of Wilmington in 1732, and then again by a Union soldier named James Cowden in 1865. Cowden was the one who would report the size of the creature. He also would nickname it Willie after Wilmington. Another theory comes from the Revolutionary soldiers dining outside of Ramsey's Tavern during the war. These men swore that they saw mermaids bathing on a sandbar in the middle of the river. Many people believe these mermaids would have swam upriver to avoid the chaos of British-occupied Wilmington, while others say they were just washing seawater out of their long, glimmering hair. Sadly, the Ramsey's Tavern would be destroyed in the flood during the late 19th century, and the mermaids have not been seen there since. Despite the dangers of the Cape Fear River and the hurricanes that plague this area, Wilmington's been able to grow. The railroad would arrive in 1804, and by 1850, Wilmington was the largest city in North Carolina. That's when a lot of the iconic antebellum structures, like the ones we will be visiting in this episode, a fort that played a pivotal role in the American Civil War, a theater built over a dark secret, a museum that houses the most haunted items in all of North Carolina, a business owned by a local legend, and the building that started the Great Revival of the 1990s. Fort Fisher, Thallion Hall, Museum of the Bazaar, Cape Fear Serpentarium, and the Cotton Exchange. We will start with the fort, whose activity seems to ramp up around the holiday season. Fort Fisher. If it weren't for Fort Fisher, many of the antebellum buildings and mansions would have probably been destroyed during the Civil War. The massive fort would keep the Union soldiers from being able to attack by sea, and it also protected the blockade runners as they were getting much needed supplies to the Confederate troops up in northern Virginia. The Union would finally set their sights on Fort Fisher right before Christmas in 1864. For the last 3 years, Wilmington had been protected by Fort Fisher, which is about an hour's drive south of Wilmington. The fort is known for its unique design. Mounds of soil and sand allow it to absorb cannon fire, making it impenetrable. They call it the Gibraltar of the South. The leader is Colonel William Lamb. He's been obsessively fortifying and adding to the fort since 1862. It's his baby, and it's about to be tested. On December 23, 1864, Union Admiral David Porter launches the first bombardment. By Christmas, he realizes they didn't have enough men or firepower to take it. They only killed about 30 rebels and lightly dented the fort's walls. But the Union isn't done with Fort Fisher. 2 weeks later, General Alfred Terry regroups and launches a much more aggressive attack. Over 10,000 feds against 1,900 rebels. Within a few days, Lamb is critically wounded, and the Confederate Army raises the white flag and surrenders the fort. A month after that, the mayor of Wilmington hands the city to the Union, and it's clear the Confederacy has lost the war. Lamb recovers from his injuries, but he's lost a piece of his soul to Fort Fisher. He visits one last time in 1907 during a veterans reunion and dies peacefully 2 years later. That's when the ghost sightings would start. Lamb's spirit is often seen standing on a parapet and walking the grounds. Locals believe he's looking for flaws in the fort's design, trying to decipher what went wrong. He spent 2.5 years fortifying every possible weak point, and it still fell to the enemy. But even if you don't spot Lamb, you're sure to run into some kind of paranormal activity at the historic site. It's teeming with intelligent apparitions and residual hauntings. Doors burst open on their own. People hear phantom footsteps, cannon fire, and screaming. You may even see ghostly boot prints in the sand. And if you see a reenactor, you may be looking at a real Civil War soldier. There's an infamous soldier ghost who walks from the ocean to the fort over and over, like a video on a loop if you have on the loop. Now, let's leave the general who continues to inspect his fort and head over to one of the most beautiful buildings that it helped protect, Thalion Hall. For centuries before the city of Wilmington was ever founded, the land where the Thalion stands was a Native American burial ground. Now, since we don't know much about the Cape Fear Indians, we don't really know what their beliefs were when it comes to death and the afterlife, but what we do know is they would bury their dead there on what was a sand dune, and they would have marked the graves with natural materials, which would just rot away with time. So, by the time James Innes would have arrived from Scotland back in 1732, this could have just looked like an empty hill here. We don't really know. What we do know is that he would go on to purchase 960 acres of land, including that plot there on the outskirts of town. When Innes and his wife passed away, they willed the land over to the city of Wilmington to be used for a free school for the youth of Wilmington, and that's when the story of the Thalion would begin. In 1803, the city of Wilmington would use Innes' land and money to build a small community theater known as the Innes Academy. Now, it is interesting that Wilmington would have supported a community theater at this time because it hadn't quite caught on in the rest of America just yet. You see, it was highly associated with Great Britain and considered very immoral, so a lot of the colonists would have just snubbed their noses at the whole idea. Nonetheless, Wilmington would build their first community theater there on that spot in 1803, and by 1806, the local troupe, the Thalion Association, named for the Greek muse of comedy, Thalia, they would begin performing in their new playhouse, and Wilmington would begin boasting about their marvelous local productions. And this would actually go on for the next 5 decades. Now, legend has it that the beloved Swedish opera singer Jenny Lind is the reason why the city decided they needed a new theater. As she was traveling through town in 1855, a mob of adoring fans surrounded her, begging her to perform at the Innes. When her manager found out about the size of the theater, he scoffed, saying, "Gentlemen, my orchestra would take up a good bit of that space." Now, Miss Lind would continue on her way, leaving the entire city embarrassed. After all, this was the largest city in North Carolina. They needed a theater that would raise their status in both size and opulence. And luckily, the city also needed a new city hall, so the Thalion Association donated the Innes Academy over to the city with the promise that the new city hall would have a new spacious theater for them to host their productions. And the city would keep up their end of the deal. I know, shocking. But the Italian was and still is strikingly beautiful. It was designed by John M. Trimble, a leading architect in theaters at the time. He had just finished designing the Pommel's Opera House for New York City and gave the Italian that classy big city look that Wilmington was hoping for. Balconies, golden accents, ornate arches, and 675 bright red seats filled the room with timeless style. The stage even has its own Thunder Run, which is a series of wooden troughs that go along backstage and give off a thundering sound effect during productions. A stagehand would normally drop a cannonball down into the trough and let it roll slowly, giving off a low rumbling noise. Now this may be the only remaining working Thunder Run left in the country. After the construction finished on the Stallion, those performing acts, they came rolling in. Acts like Buffalo Bill Cody, John Philip Sousa, and the Ziegfeld Follies, well, they all performed here, as well as the local productions, graduations, concerts, and even roller skating. But in the 1930s, the 80-year-old building was starting to show her age. There were talks of demolitions in the 30s and the 40s, and it was met by the protests of Wilmington locals each time. Finally, in 1963, the money was raised and the Italian Hall Commission was formed, and they have been protecting and repairing the building ever since. Now in 1983, just 20 years later, the commission was able to raise $5 million for the renovations and expansions of the theater. Construction began in 1988, and it would celebrate its grand reopening 2 years later with a 2-week-long arts festival, which would be a grand affair celebrating Wilmington's most cherished building. But the thing is, they would not talk about what they found during these renovations. It would actually come out years later that crews found bones underneath the building back in 1988 and then as recently as 2010. So there could actually still be skeletons under there today. It makes you wonder, how many bones did they find back when they were building the Ennis Academy? And what else might they have found? I mean, it's actually pretty common knowledge that a lot of the Native Americans would have buried arrowheads, other stone tools, even pottery with their loved ones when they passed away. And it's also pretty well known that the colonists would actually rob these Native American burial grounds of these artifacts anytime they would find them and then sell them. In fact, back in the early 20th century, the selling of stolen Indian artifacts was actually a booming business. You could even buy a Native American finger bone. The disturbance seems to have woken quite a few spirits inside the building. Actors talk about feeling cold spots and hearing disturbing, disembodied voices while preparing for a show. Imagine standing back in one of those dark corridors when suddenly you feel someone breathing down the back of your neck. Then you hear a raspy whisper right in your ear and the air around you goes ice cold. If that's not creepy enough, the theater is also believed to be haunted by former actors. Folks claim to see 2 apparitions, a man and a woman, normally strolling along the second-floor balcony during rehearsals. Props, makeup, scripts, they all go missing from time to time, only to reappear in odd places. But my favorite story about these ghostly actors involves a director's dog. One night the cast and crew were preparing for a big show the next day, and they knew that this rehearsal was going to run long, so the director decided he was going to bring his small dog with him so he didn't have to stay home alone. As the director was giving notes to the actors up on stage, the dog had actually wandered up onto the second-floor balcony where he began exploring. The dog quickly lost its footing and fell. Now, this fall should have been catastrophic. The dog should have been dead or severely wounded, but when the director rushed over to his beloved pet, he was perfectly fine. One actor who saw the dog fall said it actually looked like someone had reached up and caught the dog and let it down slowly just before it hit the floor. So it seems like the ghosts of the Italian prefer animals to humans, but can you blame them? Don't we all? Now, let's leave this beautiful theater haunted by former actors and head over to a museum where a skull whose legend with a skull whose legend inspired Indiana Jones movie, the Museum of the Bizarre. Established back in 2015, the Museum of the Bizarre houses some of the most haunted items in all of North Carolina. The entire collection is owned by former U.S. Coast Guard Justin Lanassa, who has been collecting haunted, cursed, and magical items for over 30 years now. He actually collected so many creepy things by the time he got married, he decided to get them out of the house and start a museum to keep the peace. His favorite item in the entire collection is an ancient crystal skull knowledge. Legend has it that there are 13 of these skulls scattered throughout the world. When they're brought together, they'll reveal the secrets of the universe and how to save humanity. There are 7 of these skulls in museums worldwide. The rest are still hidden. His second favorite item is a lantern that is the center of one of North Carolina's most famous ghost stories. So Joe Baldwin was a signalman for the Wilmington Florence Augusta line back in the 1860s. One dark night in 1867, he would fall asleep on the caboose of a train after a long day's work. He would be awoken by a sudden jolt to find that the caboose he was sleeping on actually came uncoupled from the rest of the train, right outside of Mako Station, which is roughly 14 miles west of Wilmington. He knew that a passenger train was due to arrive at Mako Station within the hour. If it were to collide with his stalled caboose, there would be a massive wreck and people would die. So Baldwin quickly grabbed his lantern and headed to the back of the caboose, where he began waving it frantically, hoping that someone would see his light. As the passenger train approached, the engineer did see the light and he did signal for the train to stop. But as we all know, those railway brakes, they are slow and highly unreliable. So, in fact, in the 1860s, they had to be stopped by brakemen who would have to manually apply the brake to each individual car. So, Baldwin would have been standing there waving his light frantically for several horrifying minutes as that train came hurtling towards him. Now, the brakemen were able to slow down the train, but they were not able to keep it from hitting the stalled caboose. Baldwin was actually decapitated in the wreck, and it was so fast and violent that his head was flung into the nearby swamp where it was never seen again. The authorities were able to get his headless corpse from the mangled wreckage and would bury his body 1 week later with heroes' honors. But over the next 110 years, people would begin to see a light floating above the tracks near Mako Station. Many of the locals began to say that this was Joe Baldwin using his lantern to try to find his missing head. Even President Grover Cleveland would see the mysterious lights while campaigning through Wilmington in 1889. But in 1977, the lights would disappear and never return. If you're wondering why, that's the same year that Brunswick County would dismantle those railroad tracks. So, if you'd like to catch a glimpse of Joe Baldwin's lantern and you are in the city of Wilmington, just grab a ticket to the Museum of the Bizarre. They're only $3, and the owner even has a bunch of Amish hex signs all along the walls as an insurance policy, because it's bad for business if ghosts, demons, and curses follow people home. Now let's leave this museum that's home to Houdini's Ouija board and head over to a building that was the site of a tragic murder, the Cape Fear Serpentarium. Just next door to the Museum of the Bizarre is the building that once housed some of the deadliest snakes known to man. We are talking so deadly they could kill an elephant with a single bite. You don't want to know what they could do to a human. Dean Repa opened up the Cape Fear Serpentarium in 2001. When you walked into the building, it was like walking into a temple out of an Indiana Jones movie. The walls were fake stone with jungle decor, and it was dark and moody. The only light would come from the floor-to-ceiling enclosures with pythons, cobras, puff adders, and bushmasters, which would all be curled up and staring back at the curious tourists. Dean spent his life capturing and studying these snakes. He traveled to 35 countries, contracted every disease known to man and survived at least 10 venomous bites. He was a local legend. He once told a reporter that he risked his life so many times he no longer feared death. His greatest fear was that he would forget to fear death. Death would eventually come for him though, but it's not the way you think. It wasn't one of his snakes. It was his wife. In 2017, Regina Ripa shot and killed her husband in the apartment they shared above the Serpentarium. She had been struggling with schizophrenia since her early 20s and had suffered several psychotic episodes during her 10-year marriage. She was found not guilty due to reasons of insanity and was sent to live in a state-run psychiatric hospital. The Serpentarium forcibly closed after Dean's death, and the snakes were sold off, and the building was renovated. It's now a dentist's office and spa. Crazy, right? It wouldn't surprise me if his spirit does still hang around the building, though, because his father did have it built for him, and he put his blood, sweat, and tears into his life's work, only to have it taken away by one gunshot. The only upside to the story is that he lived his life to the fullest for 60 years. He followed his passions and left behind a legacy to be proud of. The purpose of the Serpentarium was to educate people, not to scare them. He changed so many hearts and minds when it came to snakes, and for that Wilmington will always remember him. Now let's leave the Serpentarium, turn to a spa, and head over to our final stop, the building that was the center of trade here in Wilmington during the 19th century, the Cotton Exchange. One of Wilmington's most popular tourist attractions, the Cotton Exchange, is an eclectic mix of shops and restaurants that span across 8 historic brick buildings. The history of the Cotton Exchange actually goes back long before these buildings had ever stood there, back during the early 1700s. During this time, rice was king in Wilmington. In the 1700s, that was Wilmington's #1 export. Along the nutrient-rich tidal banks of the marshy Cape Fear River, the rice plantations would thrive. Cotton would become king in Wilmington after the Civil War. While rice was playing that main role, there was a low-lying area around the old horse pond on North Front Street, which began to sow a different kind of seed. Alongside the horse pond was an enclosed pasture known as a paddock. When it would rain, the low-lying pasture or hollow would flood. Over time, the area was referred to as Paddock's Hollow, which would eventually be shortened to Paddy's Hollow. In the 1700s, squatters would start to settle on the undesirable land, building their rickety shacks. It was an eclectic mix of freed slaves and the destitute that would settle there at first, but it would soon be joined by other fringes of society: drunks, opium addicts, libertines, and harlots. Paddy's Hollow would slowly become a much larger den of iniquity than Paradise Alley. Police wouldn't even patrol the area after sunset after being attacked by a gang at knife point. The Front Street Methodist Church, moving in on Front and Walnut Streets in 1844, couldn't even stop the debauchery. Complaints were even logged with the local offices for loud clatter coming from the drunken fools, drowning out their Sunday sermons. During the Civil War, robberies, assaults, and murders were taking place in broad daylight. It was still considered too dangerous for police to patrol Paddy's Hollow. The young Confederate and Union soldiers that would pour into the hollow also had no intentions of helping to establish law and order. The central building is the most famous, built pre-Civil War. It housed the Cape Fear Flour and Pearl Hominy Mill in 1884. In 1886, the Wilmington's North End would be ravaged by a terrible fire, essentially destroying Paddy's Hollow and hundreds of other structures, including the Front Street Methodist Church. The church would decide to rebuild a couple blocks up the street at what was 4th and Mulberry Streets. Mulberry Street would become Grace Street, and today the church is still standing, known as the Grace Methodist United Church. When they relocated the church, they decided not to bring the cemetery adjacent to it with them. So the coffins were relocated to the Oakdale Cemetery, or so people were told. In 1919, the central building became the Sprint Building. Alexander Sprint & Son was a thriving cotton company that had grown into an international business. From Wilmington, they could easily export their cotton to other American and European ports. That's how the buildings became known as the Cotton Exchange. But Sprint wasn't alone here. There was a laundry, a sewing supply company, a barber, a salon, saloon, and a grocery store, to name a few other things. At the time, the railroad provided a steady flow of customers, so downtown Wilmington was a great place to do business. But the 1960s and 70s brought a wave of misfortune. Atlantic Coastline Railroads left Wilmington in 1961, which pulled visitors away from downtown. Around the same time, America began building large shopping malls with plenty of parking, and downtowns all around the country struggled to maintain customers. Eventually, many of the businesses closed their doors, and downtown Wilmington was abandoned. To make matters worse, the Cotton Exchange buildings were damaged in a hurricane and fire. By 1974, the entire complex was headed for the chopping block. The city's plans were to demolish old abandoned buildings to make room for fresh new stores and restaurants that would bring young people back to the area. Thankfully, J.R. Reeves and M.T. Murray stepped in and restored the buildings to their former glory. John and Jean Bullock purchased the complex from them in 1990. They later passed it down to their daughter Nancy, who still owns it today. There are many ghosts throughout the buildings. I'm going to talk about a few, starting with the one who may be haunting multiple venues inside. This spirit has been seen in a cozy German cafe and a makeup shop above it. The German Cafe is an amazing local German-style cafe located in what was the old granary building. The cafe has 2 dining rooms in the back with a small hallway in between, and it is in that hallway that the owner of the German Cafe himself has had an experience. One evening, while turning out the lights to close up, he steps out of the kitchen into the dimly lit hallway and glances to the left. That's when he notices a woman standing on the top landing. This beautiful apparition was dressed in Victorian-era clothing in a beautiful floor-length velvet-like gown, which was a deep shade of purple with black lace. She just stood there, staring at him. As he watched the spirit, she slowly began to fade away, the whole time watching him while she faded in and out. The owner took a deep breath and finally blinked. He then rushed into the dining room, but it was too late. She was gone. In the many years following this event, the owner never actually saw the woman again. Most of the time, he would have his wife or another employee lock up with him, but even on nights when he would find himself alone, he always tries to steal a quick look into the dining room, only to find that she isn't there. But as soon as he turns to walk down the hallway, he always feels like she is still there, watching him as he exits the building. The same woman is also believed to be haunting the Avon Boutique, located just above the German Cafe dining room. The makeup shop was originally on the other side of the building, and when it moved, they hired a handyman to build in some shelves. They had the handyman work after hours so that they wouldn't bother the neighboring businesses. After bringing in all of his tools that first night around 11 p.m., just as he was beginning to work, he heard a woman scream out and a window slam shut. He would search the entire shop and couldn't find anything or anyone that could have made such a noise. The handyman decided that that was his sign to call it a night. The next night, he convinced his father-in-law to join him, stating that there was a lot of work to be done and so he needed a little help. When he finally came clean, his father-in-law started picking at him until, sure enough, at 11 p.m., they both heard a woman's scream and a window slam shut. The owner of the boutique has not had any hostile experiences with the resident spirit. She normally just moves items around on the shelves while the shop is closed, and they have even named her Henrietta. Henrietta might also be one of the many spirits haunting the typical souvenir shop across the way that has been a statue of the Cotton Exchange since it was founded back in 1992, the Top Toad. The main stories that come out of this shop that sells everything from t-shirts and hats to niche Animal Crossing signs is that employees will hear and see hangers moving on their own when there are no customers in the shop. They even have caught footage of spirits on the CCTV footage. Voices can also be heard, but they can never discern what's being said. One of the creepiest ghosts in the building is the resident spirit of Paddy's Hollow. The only thing that this popular pub and restaurant has in common with the former red light district is its name. They are known best for their flatbreads, and Paddy's Hollow is the closest you can get to that old cemetery that was supposedly moved back in the 1880s. Not just because it is in the northeast corner of the Cotton Exchange, but also because the ceiling is 6 feet underground. This might be why the ghost seen mostly after hours in Paddy's Hollow is said to be a tall, gaunt man with long, wavy black hair and wearing all black. Located just above Paddy's Hollow, there used to be an ice cream shop known as the Scoop. It would close down in 2020 due to COVID. That space is home to a little prankster. This spirit is said to be a little girl that likes to mess around with the wind chimes and the appliances in the shop. Her face has been seen reflecting in the glass of the ice cream cases and in the face of the clock hanging on the wall. Her voice has also been heard, but again, no one can ever make out what she is saying. Well, that concludes this week's video of Stormi Tells Ghost Stories Haunted Wilmington. I hope you enjoyed hearing some of the darkest stories the beautiful city on the beach has to offer. From the fort that changed the course of American Civil War, to the theater built on a Native American burial ground. From the museum that holds North Carolina's most famous lantern, to an apartment above what was a serpentarium. To the group of buildings that started the Great Historic Revival. Fort Fisher, Thallion Hall, the Museum of the Bazaar, Cape Fear Serpentarium, and the Cotton Exchange. Don't forget to check out some of my other playlists while you are here. On Stormi Teaches Music, I will release a cover video on Mondays at 6 p.m. Eastern and a video of me teaching the song covered on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. You can catch the live stream of the lesson on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on my Patreon. On the Stormi Does Arts playlist, I have some of the partial videos of the live streams that you can catch on my Patreon for the gold tier or higher. These streams are daily at 11 a.m. Eastern, and the link to my Patreon is in the description box and comments below. So it's time for the poll for the city we will be visiting in December of 2025. I already have the city planned for November, and you will find that one out on the first Tuesday of November. This will be another international city that we will be visiting. In the comments below, choose between A. Dublin, Ireland, B. St. Petersburg, Russia, C. Madrid, Spain, or D. Rome, Italy. Also, I do have a one-time donation option on my Patreon that does go towards building a new form of public school. This will be a non-profit organization that will teach our children how to think, not what to think. I believe in recent events it has been proven that the current public school system is toxic and has been indoctrinating the most innocent and those who should be the most protected. Everything donated to that option on my Patreon goes 100% into this fund. I am also open to teaming up with people like PragerU, TPUSA, and other independent, moderate, or conservative outlets. Even liberals who are not really progressive and radical and into that radical socialism are willing to I'm willing to collaborate with as well. So with that, if you do want to contribute to that, just check out that option. And finally, check out my Stormi Talks True Crime for some of the most heinous crimes in history. New videos are posted Thursdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. For anyone who wants to make a one-time donation to the channel to help keep it running while I'm building my audience, there's a QR code to my Venmo and CashApp on the screen. There is also a link to both in the description box and comments below. If you are ever in Wilmington, North Carolina area, sign up for the Wilmington Ghosts Walking Tour or Wilmington Spirits and Spirits Pub Crawl with U.S. Ghost Adventures. You can have me or one of our other talented guides show you around our historic downtown and hear some of the darkest stories the beautiful city on the beach has to offer. While you are visiting, if you decide you want to buy or stay or buy a vacation home here in the area, check out my Moving to Coastal Carolina channel and contact me, as I am a licensed realtor in the southeastern North Carolina area. Tune in next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the next video on Stormi Tells Ghost Stories Haunted Wilmington. Until then, have a great week and stay safe.